Perhaps Jesus was in his carpenter shop when he heard the news that his cousin John was baptizing in the Jordan River. The Jordan River was some 70 miles from Nazareth, where Jesus lived. So perhaps while in his carpenter shop, he heard the news that John was baptizing there in that river. I can envision Jesus putting away his carpentry tools, cleaning up his carpenter shop, gathering together some meager belongings, some food and some drink for the journey, kissing his Mother Mary goodbye, hugging his brothers and his sisters, and then setting out for that very long journey to that river. And when he got to that river, as the gospel tells us, he entered into it and was baptized by John the Baptist. Now, Christian thinkers and scholars have been intrigued for some time as to why Jesus chose to be baptized by John in the Jordan. At that moment, he certainly knew that he was called to be the Son of God, and he could have chosen any number of dramatic ways to tell the world that he was ready to start his ministry, the ministry to which God had called him. Any number of ways, any number of dramatic ways. And yet Jesus chose to walk that 70 miles, enter that river, waist deep, and humbly submit himself for baptism. Well, I want this morning to look in on seeing that moment in the life of Jesus, and I want us to receive some spiritual insights from it. First of all, this: Jesus had prepared himself for that moment. Jesus had prepared himself for the moment that he would commit himself to that for which God had called him. Luke 2 tells us that as Jesus grew from childhood to adolescence to adulthood, he grew in several ways. Luke says that he grew spiritually, he grew intellectually, he grew morally, he grew in his relationship with God, and he grew in the way he related to other people. That's what we find in Luke 2. So as he moved again from childhood to adolescence to adulthood, Jesus was growing. He was growing intellectually and spiritually and morally, and he was deepening in his relationship with God, and he was discovering how to relate to other people. Well, how did he grow? If you read the Gospels, you come very quickly to the realization that there were certain disciplines that Jesus practiced and made a priority in his life. One was worship. Worship was a priority for Jesus. Prayer was a priority for Jesus. And searching the Holy Scriptures was a priority for Jesus. When you read the Gospels, you come away with the clear evidence that for Jesus of Nazareth, worship was a priority, prayer was a priority, and immersion in Holy Scripture was a priority. Now, there's a lesson there for us, don't you think? You want to grow more in 2015, don't you? I certainly want to become more mature spiritually in 2015, and the lesson as to how to do that is right here in the story of Jesus. If you want to grow spiritually, if you want to become more mature spiritually, then worship and prayer and Holy Scripture must become priorities in your life. That's what we learn here. Secondly, at the Jordan, Jesus surrenders to God's will. At the Jordan River, in the act of baptism, Jesus surrenders to God's will. Certainly Mary and Joseph had told Jesus many times about the wondrous things that God had done in their life, and how he had told them, the angel had told them, that this one was destined to be the Son of God. They had told him those stories. And certainly Jesus, over those 30 years of preparation, had felt God's touch and God's pull and God's nudge that there was this special call in his life to be the Son. And so when he came to that river, intentionally came to that river, and when he waded once again waist deep into the invigorating waters of the Jordan, he made a statement. In that river, in that act, at that time, he surrendered to the will of God. And when he did that, it created a spiritual ripple effect over human history. A spiritual ripple effect that touches your life and touches my life. And that ripple effect is that we too have to answer that question. We too have to answer the question, will we surrender to the will of God? In the Jordan River, when Jesus of Nazareth surrendered to the will of God, he created a ripple effect for all humanity that we too must discern whether or not we will surrender to the will of God. I've quoted before Rick Warren, and I love this piece that he writes when he says, the purpose of your life is far greater than your own personal fulfillment, far greater than your peace of mind, and far greater even than your happiness. If you want to know why you were placed on this planet, if you want to know why you are here, you must begin with God. You were born by his purpose and for his purpose. At the Jordan River, by the commitment of Jesus, you and I are given the opportunity to make our own surrender. Thirdly, at the Jordan River, Jesus identifies with us, with humanity. You see, when he got to the banks of the Jordan River, there would have been a long line of people ready to be baptized by John. The text tells us that they came from all of Judea, they came from Jerusalem, probably hundreds of them. And they lined up on the banks of the Jordan River one by one, ready to enter those waters and to be baptized by John the Baptist. And there's no doubt that Jesus, once John caught his eye, could have circumvented that line and simply come to John. And after John protested baptizing him, said, no, John, you need to do it, and then baptized. But he didn't. Know that? He got in line. Jesus got in line with all those frail, imperfect human beings. Jesus got in line with all those who are very human, men and women. And he walked the same path they walked into those waters and humbled himself in the same way they did in the act of baptism. In order to say, I may be the Son of God, but I'm still a very real human being. I understand what it's like to be human. You know, if you made a list of the feelings and the thoughts that we human beings have that define us and make us who we are, you probably have on your list things like hunger and thirst. Again, if you made a list of the things, the feelings, the thoughts that define us as human beings, that make us human, you'd have hunger and thirst, pain, love and affection, anger, fatigue, joy and yet sorrow, despair, grief, hope, but also disillusionment. And you know, if you read the Gospels, Jesus experienced every single one of those feelings, those thoughts, emotions, telling us very clearly that he was a human being who understands us. I love the way one Christian thinker puts it when he writes, Jesus' action to be baptized by his cousin John reveals a significant spiritual truth for you and me. He was telling the world that he's not some spiritual robot who asks of us what he himself doesn't understand. He's not some divine action figure walking planet Earth without any hint of the challenges we human beings face in doing God's will. He's not some detached spiritual avatar only seeming to be one of us. No, in that river, on that day, Jesus of Nazareth made it very clear that he is one with us, that he understands everything about being a human being, including all the challenges you and I face in being faithful. Now that is good news, if you think about it. And finally, Jesus, here in the Jordan, reveals that he needs God's help. Here in the Jordan, Jesus reveals that he needs God's help. You know, when we perform the sacrament of baptism, when we initiate the sacrament of baptism in somebody's life, and when you were baptized, there were two things that were clear and are always clear in the act of baptism. One is that the grace of God is a gift. When we baptize someone, we're making a statement that the grace of God is a gift. But we're also signaling that we need that grace. So whenever there's the sacrament of baptism, two things are happening. We're acknowledging the gift of God's grace, but we're also recognizing that every single one of us needs that grace and needs God's help. Even though God would say to Jesus at the end of the baptism, "You are my son, with you I am well pleased," Jesus knew very clearly when he left that Jordan River and he marched into that desert for the temptation, and when he began his public ministry, he would need God's help. He would need the continuing grace of God to see him through all that lie ahead. There's a old gospel song called "Jesus Walked This Lonesome Valley." Most of you probably know that song. It's got these words: Jesus walked this lonesome valley. He had to walk it by himself. Oh, nobody else could walk it for him. He had to walk it by himself. Not true. I like the song, but it's not true. It is not true that when Jesus of Nazareth left the Jordan River, that he had to walk the journey that lie ahead alone, because he knew the grace of God was available to him to help him. You know what the rest of that song says? We must walk this lonesome valley. We have to walk it by ourselves. Oh, nobody else can walk it for us. We have to walk it by ourselves. Not true. You don't walk a spiritual journey by yourself. You don't walk the path of commitment to Jesus by yourself. You don't walk the call of God by yourself. As it was with Jesus, so it is with you and me. God's grace is available to us, and God's grace readily empowers us each step of the way. 30 years old, going about his carpentry work, and the news comes. 70 miles down the road, Cousin John is baptizing. And he gets up, says goodbye to his family, heads out for the 3 to 4 day journey to the Jordan, and walks waist deep into those waters to be baptized. And in that moment, we learn some things, or we're reminded of some things, that Jesus prepared himself for that moment. That worship and prayer and Holy Scripture are the disciplines which help us all be ready for the call. And that we are called to surrender to God. He had to make that decision, and we have to make that decision. And he's one with us. He understands us. There's nothing you face or I face that Jesus doesn't understand. And he, like us, needed God's help. Thanks be to God. His grace is always there.